Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the Piko Owl. This comes in several different varieties. The version you see in front of you is the Piko Owl version 1. There's the version 2, Piko Owl Light edition. There's also the straight Piko X, which means you don't have the prop guard. And you also have the Piko X All-in-One or AIO edition, which is a carbon fiber bumper guard. This is 87 millimeters motor post to motor post, as nearly as I can get measured. And we use 1935 props, 1103 8000 kV motors. Of course, you can put the 10,000 kV motors on there if you want. And the brain or the core is a Piko BLX. And in my case, I use the Cicada 10 amp all-in-one ESC. And you can mount a mini Mobius or an 808. if you've been to my channel before, you know that micros are kind of my thing. I enjoy larger quads as well, and I enjoy tinkering and projects and repairs. This one has took an especially bad beating, and it's been very robust. I've been very happy. A number of times I thought I would surely broken something much more serious, but the only breakage that I got on a pretty bad crash would have been this duct. If you can see the glue right down in there, this duct was split from about this edge around to about here, and I just used some of my welder's adhesive. I used this contact adhesive and it fixed it right up. It does take 12 hours to set, but good stuff. And as far as the build goes, I originally, and if you watch the full video, not that, you know, I expect everyone to, I had originally planned on using one of the new Eachine VTXs that I could separate and just have a camera up here and then have a VTX on the back. And I thought about putting it back here, but with the size, it just didn't quite work out. Also, one of the trouble I had with the build was using my DSM satellite receiver. I'd originally planned to put it right up in the top. There's a recess up in the top of this plate, and sticking it up in there, or centering it on the Pico and then putting the top plate over the top. That did not work. I ended up having to put my receiver between the ESC and the flight controller, so I had to use larger standoffs in there. As you can see, my props have taken a beating, and they even though the props are beat up, our frame is still well intact. And that's always something that I think we're all concerned about when we buy 3D printed parts is how long are they going to last. And I've been very happy with this. And the really cool thing about this is you can buy other features that you want to go, like if you want the Light Edition. I'm not the main difference on the Light Edition is that the camera's not located in the front, it's located in the top pod, and instead of having a big plate like this, the pod is more light and slimmed down, so there's not as much plastic up here. The tolerances around the props are very, very small, so in a couple of cases when my props got bent out of shape, that's the first way I would notice is the props would strike on the inside of the ducts. I did kill, you'll note if you watch the build video, I had a different camera on to start, and I crashed this so many times, I did kill my original camera. At first I thought it was just the antenna. The range got real short on it, and after replacing the antenna, the range was somewhat improved, but then all of a sudden it just stopped working on the next power cycle. I use Duralock here on the bottom. Using Duralock on the bottom helps to just stick the battery on, and then we can fuss the wires to get everything secured. And as far as the battery goes, I flew primarily with this battery. I know this isn't readily available, so you want to stay with something somewhere between 300 and 500 depending upon what kind of flight you're looking for. If you want longer flights, you can definitely go with something that's bigger and heavier, and it'll just be more agile. When you go into a turn, it'll probably pull you in that direction. I flew with a heavier battery that was a 480 milliamp, and I oftentimes felt like when I turned and tried to coordinate that I got pulled in that direction quite a bit further than I did with a lighter battery. And these are so light that even with a small battery, you can get a long flight time. I averaged 3 minutes with this particular battery. And now that we're talking about weight, let's bring out the scale. So 56.9, 56.8, somewhere between those two weights. And I've also got a piece of Duralock on the top, which allows me to mount these little mini cameras, which you saw a little bit of that footage, but adding this much weight, it made it much more challenging to fly, especially because I spent so much time flying without it. I think you could definitely adjust to it if you fly consistently with this amount of weight. This is a Mobius Mini, and it's 27 grams, and this is the Keychain 808. Let's see, I don't remember how much this one was. It's 18.3 grams. So you'd probably be better served with towing this around, but this is going to have better image quality. This is a pretty decent little camera for 27 grams. I'm still waiting for something around 10 or 12 that has this same sort of image quality and feature set. The battery I use, so if you can get an idea, that's 18.8. You also probably want to see a comparison. If you, again, have been to the channel before, you know that I built a Quattrovolant Carbon Q, or Q Carbon 85. This guy. So let's see what he weighs. So 58.4. The weight's very, very comparable. And we have very similar designs. We just have different ways of going about it. I put them side by side, not to compare them directly to one another as far as performance goes, but just to compare how they look visually. As far as the build goes, I will do a comparison on that. I do think it was easier to build the Q85. And primarily that was probably due to the fact that I used a 4-in-1 ESC on this one. And that proved to be problematic because getting the prop guard, which is all in one unit, slid down over the top, I actually had to bore out. You can't see it, but there's that center pod within this prop guard, and I had to bore that out in order to get mine down, which, you know, isn't that big a deal. It's just kind of part of the hobby. I used a Dremel and a sanding wheel on it and just kind of went around and then did a dry fit until that worked. I'm going to reserve judgment on these until I have a few more on hand. I have placed or pre-ordered an Aurora 90, which is from Eachine. I also am taking a look at another Eachine product that's similar to this in the X73S, which is the brushless version of the X73. I was not a fan of the X73 originally. And we also have the Mosquito from Furious coming out, which I am trying to save up the quad budget in order to get one, or maybe find a few extra dollars in the quad budget. That one comes in at $250, so it's more expensive than one of these builds. So after I get all of kind of the ones I'm targeting and the ones that I can afford to get, then I'll do a comparison of the different features, the different feel of how they fly. But right now, I'm very happy with both of these, and quite frankly, I'm not flying my brushed micros all that much because I have these, and I fly them around in the house, and it's part of my nighttime routine before I go to bed. And I have been putting this through the paces on a daily basis. It's been built for about 10 days, and I don't know how many flights I've put into it. It has held up very, very well. I'm very happy, just as though I was with the Q85. This is a good product. I think if you want to build and you want some of your own blood, sweat, and tears in there, these are the way to go. If you don't want to build, then we're going to have to wait on those other products to be released. Before we get into the build video, I have already edited that part of the video, and unfortunately, I get 6 ways confused when I start talking about the motors. So ignore what I say when I say this is motor 1, this is motor 2. Ignore what I say when we want to wire them up. I had all sorts of things I had to actually change in the end to get it to work right, because I had been reading about D-Ronin and other flight controllers, and I think I must have had that stuff in my mind as I was wiring the motors up, because I just get it all wrong. So essentially, you want to just make sure that your props rotate in the same direction. And I'm starting to become more and more of a fan of the BLHeli suite, the Chrome app, because it's worked very well in the cases that I've used it. And it's so much, in my mind, it's so much simpler to use than the BLHeli suite where you had to download it. So I might start just wiring all my motors straight through all the time now and just using that to switch things around. Okay, after the build video, we will have some more flight footage, and that'll be it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down in the section below, and enjoy the rest of the video. Got all the parts laid out for this build. Of course, we've got our Pico frame, and this is the Owl edition that you can get when you buy the Piko Owl. It's a 3D printed prop guard hoop frame, and you can see this is version 1 because my camera is going to sit right there, or at least part of my camera. And along with this kit, you can get the version 2, which is made for the camera on top of the pod. Version 1 comes with this little camera mount that's still inside the package, so I keep all the screws and nuts together. Your camera just slides down in there, and I think that's the one I'm going to do. I'm going to just put the camera right in down that slot, and I'll have a nice low profile, which is going to be different than my Q85. If you haven't seen my Q85, I'll put a card for it right up here. There's probably already a card in this video for that. And this is the 3D printed top plate, and they have one of these top plates so that you can get the Innova VTX and OSD that goes to the Piko BLX, which this is our Piko BLX, of course, right here. In this particular case, we're using the Cicada 10 amp 4-in-1 ESC, made for 2 to 3S. We'll probably be running 2S on this because of the motors. And speaking of the motors, these are, of course, the RacerStar, and I'm sure you're not going to be able to see this, 8,000 kV versions. Got some standoffs over here. We've got one of the new eSheen VTXs. This is the VTX03. This is the 200 milliwatt version, which is overkill for my installation, but I use the 25 milliwatt version that I have already, and it includes a UFL antenna. So if you wanted to, you could get a FuriousFPV circular polarized antenna and clip it right to that if you wanted to go circular, but I'm going to go linear. And my plan is to mount this kind of flat down here somewhere in the back and keep everything out of the way nice and tidy, and keep my profile as low as I can. I want to see what sort of small gaps I can get through. You could also use this. This is the CM275. It comes under other names. Bold Clash, I think, as the F01 or something like that. But you can find this camera from a number of different sources. They're identical. I compared the RCX version to the Banggood version, and to me they looked exactly the same. The PCB was a different coloration, but that could also just go right down here with some foam tape, where you could clip that into your mount that the kit comes with and have that down in front, which that would sure make the installation pretty easy. The camera that I have here is purchased from Banggood as well. It's a 120-degree camera, or so the package says, and you can see it's still got the microphone on it. I don't believe the VTX has that connector, so I'll probably just be taking that off. I'll just clip the microphone right off. I might desolder it. No, I'll just clip it off. There's nothing to hear when you have these little microphones right next to the motors. All we hear is the whirring of the motors, and it's not a good sound. It's almost like you've tuned into a radio station that doesn't exist, and you just get that static or that snow. The first thing that I wanted to cover was I learned something, and it makes perfect sense. I had a motor issue, and it turned out it was an ESC issue, but I thought I had a motor issue, and I was posting on RC groups, and someone said, "Did you check the motors?" And I said, "Check the motors? How?" And they said, "Did you check them for conductivity?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I got out my trusty $15 meter. We turned that on. This one has a really low buzzer. There's the sound. Hopefully you heard it. So I hope that comes through. And you can go through and just check all your motors. This is kind of a squirrely thing with the fingers here. Let me get this all in one hand. You could also use some putty and just put it on your desk. Can you hear that tone? Here, I'll bring my meter into shot just so you see what I'm saying. Geez, these wires are so fiddly. So you hear that, and you see we get a little reading over there. We do that for all three wires, and that ensures that at least the electrical side of our motors works. Now, whether we have a bearing problem or a different problem, we could have to determine that when they're running. So that's one good tip. Also, make sure you've plugged in your VTX, or not your VTX, your flight controller. Go ahead and flash it if you have any plans to flash it. The Piko BLX has been coming with Betaflight 301, and I went ahead and set a few configuration options on mine, and so it's all set to go. Let's reorganize and let's get started. We'll start with the motors and the 4-in-1 ESC. We've now got our 4-in-1 ESC mounted. It's not flush, and in the meantime I was doing some home stuff and I split my thumb, so no big deal. And one of you gave, last time I was doing a build with these tiny little motor wires, said strip them with fingernail clippers, and I did find that that works a whole lot better than the other methods I was using, which was wire cutters or using a knife and rolling it on the ground. So good tip, thank you very much. Now we just need to tin things up. The iron is good and hot, so I'm going to do the motor wires first. Try not to get these stuck together. I'm zoomed in a little bit more than normal, so my hands are not all of a sudden ginormous. It is just because we're working on a tiny little micro. Okay, now we just move these out of the way. And we're going to tin the pads. I don't have my battery strap in, and I think we should be able to work that in just fine with the gap that we got in the bottom to give us additional access. But you may find that if you have a different strap that's maybe wider or something, a little bit tougher to get in there, you may want to start with putting the battery strap in there first. Well, that's pretty smoky stuff. I don't remember my last one being this smoky. Well, that's a big blob. Okay, I'm going to flip it around. Alright. So I'm going to grab this wire here. Oh, I better get some blue tack. Going to use some blue tack. Stick it down so it doesn't float around on me. So I'm going to turn this whole thing around. This is front, so this is motor 4. Okay, I use blue tack. Keep that down. This might be a little bit tricky with the camera. I apologize if I don't do a very good job keeping all my fingers and iron out of the. There's one, and I'm going to take. Yeah, I'm going to take the outside wire. Go to this middle spot. And then the middle wire, I'm going to take to this spot. Oh, that's tight. I'm going to switch. I must have had some troubles trimming that off. So that's the longest one. I'm going to go here. Little pull tests on these. I don't like that one sticking up so much. Okay, there's motor 4. Let's go ahead and do this one. It's straight through, so we take the furthest outside or furthest inside wire. Now we grab the middle wire. And then the outside wire. So this is one, so we'll need to cross these somewhere. Let's get them all out. I'm going to cross the two outside ones. Take the middle wire to the outside pad here. Gotta clean my tips, getting a little dodgy. And do the final wire for this one. So this one is also straight through. This is our near wire. And if it turns out any of them are rotating wrong, we can either switch them in the BLHeli suite, which is now a Chrome app. So you need to download Chrome and look for the BLHeli suite in the, well, that one moved around a lot, in the App Store. Download and install that for your browser if you haven't already. like that one either. Okay, so we've already got our motors wired up. The next thing I need to do is get a couple of short pieces of wire, and because this one does not have power off of it, if you're we've just got the 4 wires here for the different motors, signal wires for each ESC, and we've got our ground, and I am going to connect the ground to the Piko, but I need power to the Piko as well. So I'm just going to take a couple pieces of wire, solder them to each side of our main power leads, and then have those laying up top. With that connector out, we have a little bit of exposed wire we can go straight down to. Full test, we're all good there. Next step is our Piko. Arrow right there points front. This is our nose. Because we're not going to be using the pads from the ESCs, we'll just be using the signal wire, which is the pads between here, there, and there. I'm going to probably route the wires through these gaps to the various locations that need to go. That's not how I like to do things. Yeah, I'll take the 2 wires from the connector that go up here, and I'll loop them underneath, and then 2 over the top, and we can connect these wires right to our battery pads. This is negative, this is positive. So these wires will actually have to loop under here, and I'll shorten those up. Get that done. So we're all set up. Again, our ground is over here on the square, so I'm going to do that one first because it's on my far side. And I've got a little bit of blue tack on the underneath side of this Piko, and the Piko right now is upside down. So now this is ready to be mounted. Oh, but I broke a connection. Good thing it broke now, not later, huh? So I'll redo that. I'm going to add some solder down there to both here and down here. This might be more of a challenge to film now that I got the got the Piko on there. Okay, that one should stay now. Okay, so now we just need to get the upper part of the standoff in there, and we'll proceed. Taking a moment here, I wanted to show you something. You can see I've kind of ground the edges of these nylon fittings down, and it's because in my particular case these won't rotate because these fets are too close together. Now what you could do is you could have your bottom piece and your top piece together and then bolt the whole thing down to the frame. That's another way to do it so you can avoid this, but because I already had everything connected to the board, I decided just to get my Dremel out and ground this down. So we'll put the last one on here, and this shouldn't, we've got way more screw that'll be going in there than what we ground down, and we've only just kind of angled the edges down, so it should be fine. I'm going to get the Piko mounted up after this, and then we're getting close. We'll do the signal wires next. Okay, I've ran into a bit of an issue doing some dry fitting with my hoops. Now I thought this should just all slide down over the top, and if we look at it here square, there is a gap on either side where if we have things just right, this should just slide down over the top, and then we use a spacer here in the edge to measure that out, and we've got some standoffs here for that. And unfortunately, because I took my wires straight off, I would be a pretty good challenge. I would have to modify this guard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the motor wires off. I snapped this one, and make sure I route the wires in between the pads, and then come, let me get a pointer. So the wires will come from between the pads, and then they'll come into the solder pads themselves, rather than coming out here on the edge. And I probably broke this one because I was pressing down on it. So I'm going to have to do that now. But doing some dry fitting here, and there's a few things that I'm looking at. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do, but I've used the smallest size standoff I have, and you can see it's right in here. Hopefully there's enough light. There's a standoff right here. It goes all the way around. And I put a standoff and then I put a screw into it, and I've got that down. But if we look at that, we can't get our USB cable in there. So we need either this to be lower or this stack to be higher. We kind of have to pick our medicine. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with a higher stack. I'm going to then take all these nylons, lock nuts off below the Pico, raise this up a little bit, just a touch. So I'll probably go to this next size up and give that one a try. I've got, just out of picture, I've got my nylon kit. You'll need to have one too. So this on the right is the size I've currently got on there, and this is in the left is what I'm going to put in there. And I'll get my calipers here and I'll measure these for you. And I'm not sure how they measure these, if they measure total length or if they measure the nut length, so we'll do both. This is the shorter one. Comes in at 11.93, so probably 12. If they measure the nut part, it's probably 6. And the one I'm going to go to is 14 in total length and 8 with just the nut part. And I think raising the Pico is going to be easier than lowering this. And we want our props to be inside the ducts. We don't want them sticking out or going below. As you can see there, that's the right height, I believe. You know, we want our props right in there inside the ducts. So that's kind of the purpose of the guard. So I'm going to undo all this stuff, and then we'll come back and we'll start to look at hooking up our camera and our VTX and our satellite receiver. I've gone ahead and done some prep work between cuts, and I went ahead and put my JST on, gave myself a little length to get that back in there, and I've got my receiver wired up, and I did some dry fitting, and some more dry fitting I should say. And as you see here, I've got the nuts inside, and then I've got the smaller of the two previously measured nylon standoffs this way, and I think that's the way we're going to have to do things. These are also male. Let me get a pointer. Female on this end and male on this end, so they're all kind of pointing up, and then we screw them in from the bottom. And we also should note that our top plate has a port cut out over here for the USB, if you didn't notice that previously. And then our receiver, which is going to be a Spectrum satellite in this case. If you don't have one, or you're not planning on using Spectrum, you're going to need to find something really small about the same size, because this has to fit pretty much right in here. And we've got cutouts in the top plate here on both ends for our antennas. I've added some hot glue to mine up here, and then this will go, let me orient this will go on here, and then we'll use some nuts on top to lock that down. But we're to the point now where we want to start connecting our ESCs to the flight controller. So we go ahead and plug that in. It goes in there nice and snug. And I've made a little chart here so we can see motor 1. If you could see this on video, this is printed so small I actually had to get my magnifying glass out in order to see all this stuff. So these are the motor numbers, and then these are the signal, the wires for signal. And I've written that stuff down, how it correlates to our particular setup. So motor 1, which is M4 labeled on this, it's actually this way. M4 here is actually, that uses signal 4. We've got motor 2, which is M3 up here, uses signal number 3, and they're 4, 3, 2, 1. That's how they're labeled here. And then we've got motor 4, motor 2, or M2, S2, and motor 3 M1S1. And then we'll just run these to the pads I've already got tinned up here. And then I'm going to connect to the ground. Some people don't connect their ESCs to ground. I prefer to do that. I'd rather connect the ground and not have to worry about a problem, sorting out a problem later, than to not connect the ground and then have to sort out a problem that could be a grounding issue. And I'll just connect it to the common ground. I'll just pick the nearest one here. I'll just go right down to this one right here. I should have tinned that up previously, but I didn't do that. So I'm going to connect these wires. Again, it goes S4, S3, S2, S1. I'm going to connect those to the proper signal pads on the Piko. And also I should note that I did bore this out a little bit to get enough clearance to where I could get this all slid on. I probably took more off than I actually needed to in the cases of these edges. We needed more clearance here and here in my particular case because the way the ESC is configured. So you may have to do the same thing, and I used a spinning wheel from my Dremel, but you can use something else as well. And I cleaned that up a little bit, but not a lot. So I'm going to get everything tinned up, cut to length, and then we'll come back and solder them on. Got everything tinned up and ready to go. So let's turn this so I can bring my heat in here. We'll start with the near side, and then I'll route these wires underneath to come to this side. And I've left myself a little bit of length, so if by chance I need to get to everything, I shouldn't have to disconnect every wire. First up, our ground. I think I'm going to need to get some blue tack out because it's moving around already. Okay, so this green wire is S4, and it goes to motor 1, which is over here. Next one is S3. That goes up here to motor 2, so we're going to skip those. Going to jump down. Actually, I'm going to route those under for now, and then we'll do the next ones. Whoa, I had the shakes on that one bad, didn't I? Little pull. So we've got motor 1 there, and that uses S4. Now this is going to be hard to follow without some sort of chart of your own, but so these wires are going to have to kind of be tucked in so that the prop guard can get on top. Okay, on the other side we've got these poking out. The yellow wire, which is S2, goes over here to motor 4. Hopefully I didn't cut that too short. Doesn't look like it. It's going to be pretty fiddly. Sorry for my hands. Little pull there. And lastly, our blue wire here. Okay, so we've got that all tinned up and ready to go. One thing I haven't done yet is weigh this. I'm sure some are curious because you can buy the Piko without the prop guards, so you might want to know about that. And I do have some nylon hardware that I've already mounted. I'm not going to take that off, so I would say maybe we've got 1 gram in nylon hardware, maybe 1.5 grams. So this prop guard as it stands weighs 14 grams. That's with the top plate. And there is an optional top plate that is taller as well. So really all we have left to do is connect our receiver, and you've got a fully functioning line of sight vehicle. But we are of course going to add FPV gear, and I think before we do that it would be wise to bind up our satellite, and I'll do that off camera, but then we can run through the clean flight or Betaflight configuration and also make sure our motors are spinning in the proper direction. We're all connected here. Let's go ahead and get into Betaflight. We'll just walk through this real quick. Not a lot to see here other than maybe serial RX selected there. Our configuration, one shot is fine. I use motor stop. I changed minimum throttle to 1050. You can play with that. That's your air mode idle speed. Serial RX. In this particular case, I couldn't get my receiver to bind up properly using 2048, so I used 1024. And down here are PID loops and gyro loop. 8.2 gives us 17% on our CPU load, which is good. You could go further with that if you wanted to, but your mileage may vary. PID tuning, the only things I've changed here is I put in the rates that I like, change them to your specific rate, and then I also changed the strength of the self-leveling in horizon mode down to 30%. I use horizon mode when I'm test flying and if I'm just not comfortable flying the vehicle in-house with in rate mode. Now our receiver, you can see we're all connected up. Our switches are working. Didn't use any deadband or yaw deadband. Our modes, I set all my vehicles up the same way. So I've got one switch, the 2-position switch, and I've set that up for arming. It's currently in the arm position, so we turn that on and off. We get arm. Air mode, I use a 3rd-position switch just out of shot. It's a 3-position switch, excuse me. It's just out of frame over here to the right. And when I turn that on to the middle position, that gives me air mode. In the top position, it gives me rate mode. And then in the lowest position, it gives me horizon. And then if we were to have a beeper, it would be on another 2-position switch. Let's go down here to the motors. Let's calibrate. Let's raise our master all the way to the top, and we'll plug in our battery. Excuse my reach. Hopefully you heard those tones. Now we lower this. And I don't know if this is required, but I always unplug the battery after that and then replug it in to check motor direction. And you can just use the individual sliders over here. So you turn on the motor, check, touch it, see if it's spinning the right direction. Go to the next one, same way, and you work your way all the way around. And lastly, so we should be all good to go there. Next thing is to do the final assembly with the prop guard on and our FPV gear. I've changed my position on the camera for one primary reason, and that was there really isn't a good spot to put this VTX. I looked at kind of just laying it in here, and then we're going to have troubles with our top plate, getting that down where we need to be in order to be able to get nuts on the top. And then I could have, maybe wedged it between the ducts, and that's just kind of ugly. So I think in this particular instance, and you probably already know this because you saw the vehicle at the beginning of the video, but just kind of working through my brain and my thought process here, I think that it must have been that this was designed specifically for a camera like this. And that's not surprising because at the time this was designed, these weren't out yet, and I don't think a lot of people were doing the separating of these two pieces. So we're going to go ahead and just mount it up traditionally, and then I'll wire it into power, and we'll get everything buttoned down. We'll be able to go fly it. Something else, if we look closely, I don't know how well this is going to come across in video. If we look closely, the camera mount has already got 10 to 15 degrees of up tilt. So that's nice in my opinion, because we don't need the camera to be actually flat, because the field of view on these little cameras is wide enough to where we can see the ground even with the up tilt. This allows us to fly more aggressively as we get the tail up and the nose down to be able to do fast forward flight, and our picture, or the main horizon, is still level in our eye line. So we have the hardware that came with this kit, a nice little set. It's a little bit of the only hardware that came with it. And we're going to mount this, solder this in, put on the top plate, put in the battery strap, and then we'll do a test line of sight, and then I'll start tuning it, and then we'll have some more flight video. Final rundown before we go to actually fly this thing. I found that the lead that I had for this camera wasn't long enough to get over to the points I wanted to connect to the Piko BLX, so I added a little extension. You can see my heat shrink right here. where that extension is, and then I ran it underneath the board. I think we might want to add, you know, a little bit of hot glue or something just to make sure that these don't by chance wiggle out of there or anything like that, just to make sure that the wires stay where they're supposed to. Or you could route the wires through this hole in the bottom and then come between the two plates and then through the gap and then through there. That would also keep it out of the way of getting tangled up in the props. So I just got to put this on, get my battery strapped, and I'm all set. Go easy on me. I hope this is the last bit, but no matter what I can do, I cannot get the top plate on with my receiver located in here. There's just, it's too tight, and bending that top plate in order to get it down on there, it's just not working. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to relocate my receiver, and I think I'm going to do that between the Pico and the ESCs. I think that's the most logical choice. So I'm going to have some more work to do. I'm going to have to raise everything up, slide that underneath, stick it down, and then get the top plate back on. I wish this were smoother, but I'm learning. Hopefully you're learning from my mistakes, and these builds will become easier and easier as we become more adept at reading them. Okay, I forgot to do this earlier. This is just pretty much a thrust or sound check if you wanted to hear what this sounds like in more in real life. And I've got a 300 mAh battery on there. You get about a 3-minute flight time out of that, and you can go, I flew up to a 500 mAh battery or milliamp battery, and your flight times go up about a minute per 100 mAh, so you get an idea of the flight time there. Also, my props are fairly beat up because I have been crashing a significant amount, as I typically do, so yours will probably be a bit quieter than this, at least with fresh props. And my Velcro strap sticks to the carpet, so I am using the board. So it hovers just under half throttle. I'm actually increasing height, so probably about 45% or 40% throttle. Do a quick punch, and this won't be a full throttle punch out, because when I do full throttle punch outs, it hits the ceiling. So this will just be kind of a jab up to about 80 or 90%. You can hear that little vibration with my props. Unfortunately, I don't have any extras to go to. I do have some on order. See right there, I held it too long and it almost stuck to the ceiling. Okay, that's a pretty good sound check. Now let's do some more FPV.